I'm writing this like a statement because that's the only way I can keep it straight. If I write it like a story, my brain starts trying to make it neat. It starts putting reasons where there weren't any. It starts turning the parts I can't explain into something symbolic or poetic, and that's not what this was. What happened to me started as a physical thing that left physical marks. It followed rules, or at least patterns. And the only reason I'm still breathing is because I started treating it like an ongoing incident instead of a bad memory. I'm not asking you to believe in monsters. I'm asking you to believe that something can target you, mark you, and keep coming back, even if you never get a clean look at what it is. I went on the trip because I needed quiet. Not the take a bath and put your phone down kind of quiet. The kind where the noise in your own head doesn't have anything to bounce off of for a while. I'd been sleeping badly for months. I was jumpy, tired, and angry for no good reason, and I'd started doing that thing where you tell people you're fine because you don't have the energy to explain that you're not. I work a job where staring at screens all day is normal. I've camped off and on since I was a kid. I know enough to respect weather, to hang food, to keep my headlamp where I can reach it, to not take dumb risks. I didn't go out there to prove anything. I went out there because the Rockies were a few hours away and I could get a couple nights where nobody needed me. I picked a trail I'd done before in daylight with friends, years earlier. Not the exact same route, but the same general area. A popular enough trailhead that you don't feel like you're vanishing, but with enough branching side trails that you can still find a pocket of space. I'm not putting the exact trail name here because I don't want anyone going out there looking for what I found. I know how that sounds, like I'm trying to make this mysterious. I'm not. I'm trying to keep you from doing what I did, which was assuming that popular means safe. Popular only means there are more witnesses for the first part. I left early in the morning, drove up while it was still dark, and pulled into the lot right after first light. The air had that sharp, cold edge it gets in late summer at elevation, even when the sun is out. There were a few cars already parked, a couple people milling around with day packs, dogs, trekking poles, the normal stuff. I checked my pack at the tailgate like I always do. Water, stove, food, bear spray, med kit, layers, headlamp, batteries, map, backup battery for my phone. I remember feeling almost annoyed at how normal everything looked, because I'd built this up in my head as an escape. An escape doesn't look like a Subaru lot and a vault toilet. There was a guy at the edge of the lot who stood out enough that I noticed him, but not enough that I would have remembered him later if everything had gone fine. He wasn't dressed wrong. He wasn't doing anything illegal. He was just still, standing with his hands at his sides, like he was waiting for someone, but not looking at the cars, not looking at the trailhead sign, not checking his phone. No pack, no dog. He was pale in a way that didn't match the sun. Not ghost pale, just the kind of pale you get when you don't spend much time outside. He had on a light hoodie and jeans, which is common enough, but he had the hood up even though it wasn't raining. I remember thinking briefly that maybe he was cold or hungover, or just didn't want the sun in his eyes. I went past him toward the trail, and he didn't move. I didn't speak to him. I wish I had, because if he'd answered like a normal human being, maybe the whole trip would have stayed in the normal world. The first mile or so was exactly what it should have been. Packed dirt, roots, the sound of other people behind me and ahead of me. Birds, the faint rush of water somewhere off to the left. I passed two groups going the other way later in the morning. The kind of hikers who tell you how far the lake is and ask if you've seen any moose. I remember being relieved by that, because it meant my head was finally quieting down. Some had wire. Some looked like they'd been looped with strips of cloth. The hanging wasn't random. There was spacing, like someone had planned where each one went. And the ground beneath a few of them had those pressed ovals again, like a place where something was set down, or someone knelt, or something heavy dragged and then stopped. The further we went, the darker it got, even though it should have still been day. The valley walls rose up on both sides, steep and close enough that it felt like we were being squeezed. The smell got stronger, until it wasn't just dead animal. It was a mix of rot and wet fur and something sharp, like burnt hair. It clung in the back of my throat. I started swallowing hard just to clear it, and it didn't clear. Caleb finally said very flat, "We're leaving," and I nodded so fast I felt stupid for not saying it first. Then we heard the sound, not a scream, not footsteps, just a low crack, wood under weight. It came from our left, uphill, in the underbrush. Both of us froze, and I remember thinking, bear, because that's what your brain reaches for when you need a reason. Caleb slowly turned his head, and I turned mine, and we stared into a wall of green and shadow. At first I saw nothing. Then I saw a shape, and my mind tried to turn it into a tree trunk because it was vertical and dark. But it wasn't still like a tree. It was a man-shaped darkness, half hidden by leaves, standing in a spot where no one should have been able to stand without making noise. It didn't look like a person wearing black clothes. It looked like the absence of detail in the shape of a man. I couldn't make out a face. I couldn't make out hands. I couldn't even be sure if it was looking at us because there were no visible eyes. But I knew with the same certainty, you know when someone is staring at the back of your head, that it was watching us. Caleb whispered my name once. Not loud, not a question, just a prompt, like he needed to hear a human voice to confirm reality. I whispered back, go, and that was it. There was no more logic, no more slow backing away. The part of my brain that cared about leaving no trace, about not getting turned around, about not injuring myself on a slope, that part shut off. We turned and we ran. Running off trail in that kind of terrain is a controlled fall. You pick a line and you commit to it and you hope you don't put your foot into a hole or hit a slick rock wrong. Branches slapped my face. Rhododendron grabbed my pack and yanked. I heard Caleb crash behind me once and I didn't stop, and I hate myself for that. But I didn't stop because the fear had turned simple. Keep moving. The smell followed us. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. It wasn't like we ran away and the air cleaned up. It stayed in my mouth, in my nose, as if it had soaked into us. And behind us, somewhere in that valley, there was another crack of wood, closer this time. Or maybe it only felt closer because we were running and every sound was amplified. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We broke out into lighter woods and I almost cried from relief because I could see farther than 10 feet. Caleb caught up to me there, breathing hard, eyes wide, and he grabbed my sleeve and pulled me without saying anything, like he needed physical contact to make sure I was real. We stumbled up the slope the way we had come down, but the land didn't look the same. That's another detail I can't make fit. Trees and rocks should anchor you. They didn't. Everything looked familiar in a general way, but not in a specific way, like we'd been dropped into a similar valley beside the one we entered. Caleb pulled out the compass with shaking hands, and for a second the needle spun, and then it settled, and he looked at it like it had betrayed him. We kept climbing anyway, following the direction we knew was right, because the alternative was to stand still and thinking was not an option. When we finally found the staircase again, it wasn't where it should have been. I expected it to be a landmark, something we could aim for, something that proved we hadn't imagined it. Instead, we came up through brush, and there it was off to the side, like it had shifted. Same number of steps, same carved grooves, same solid, wrong presence. We didn't climb it, we didn't touch it. We ran past it like it was electrified, and we didn't want to find out. We hit the trail again like people breaking the surface after being underwater. The woods had sound, birds, wind through the canopy, the normal small noise of life. I stopped, bent over, hands on my knees, trying not to vomit. Caleb stood upright and scanned the trees like he expected that black figure to step out onto the path like a hunter. He didn't say anything until we were moving fast on the trail, almost jogging, and then he said, "Don't talk about it until we're at the truck." I didn't argue. I understood what he meant. Saying it out loud felt like it would make it real in a new way. At the truck, we threw our packs in and got in like we were being chased. Caleb locked the doors with a hard click that sounded too loud. We sat there breathing for a few seconds, looking out at the trees. It was still daylight. Cars passed on the road. The world didn't look altered. And then that smell came back strong, like it had been waiting for us to stop moving. It was in the cab, and it made no sense because we hadn't brought anything back. Caleb leaned forward and turned the air on full blast, like cold air would solve it. It didn't. He looked at me then, and his eyes did this thing I'd never seen before, like his mind was trying to reject an image and failing. He said very quietly, "You saw him." I nodded. "Yeah," I said, "I saw him. We didn't call anyone. Not that night. Not the next day. We talked about it once, sitting in my kitchen with the lights on, and we kept it clipped and factual. Staircase, valley, hanging animals, symbols, Black figure. Run. When Caleb described it, he used the same words I would have used. That's what bothered me most. If it had been a shared delusion, you'd expect the details to blur. They didn't. They matched. I tried to tell myself the simplest explanation. We stumbled onto someone's sick dumping ground, and the man was a poacher, or a person living off-grid who didn't want to be seen. That should have been enough. It would have been terrifying, but it would have been normal. The problem is that normal explanations don't account for the way the air felt in that valley, or the way the sound dropped, or the way the staircase sat there like a piece of a house without a house. They don't account for how that figure looked like darkness shaped into a body, detailless and still, watching from 10 feet away without moving a leaf. And they definitely don't account for the smell, because the smell didn't stay in the truck. For weeks afterward, it hit me in flashes. Opening a closet, stepping into my garage, leaning over a sink of dishwater. That same sour, burnt, wet fur rot, like something had gotten close enough to leave residue on me. It never lasted long. It would be there for a second, strong enough to make my eyes water, and then it would be gone. Sometimes it came with nothing else. Sometimes it came with a momentary feeling of being observed, not in a paranoid way, but in the same physical way you feel a gaze. I checked my locks more. I started turning on more lights. I avoided hiking alone, and when I did go, I stayed on trail, and I kept my headlamp even in daylight, like a superstition I didn't want to name. Caleb doesn't go off trail anymore. He still hikes. He still loves the mountains. But he won't step into thick laurel unless he has to, and he won't follow a depression in the land just because it looks like it might lead somewhere interesting. We don't talk about that staircase unless we're already talking about something else, like we have to build up to it. He once told me he dreamed about it. Not in a dramatic nightmare way, just a dream where he was standing at the bottom of those steps, looking up, and the steps kept going higher than they should, vanishing into fog. He said he woke up with that smell in his nose. The last time it happened to me was in a grocery store parking lot on a bright afternoon. I was loading bags into the trunk when the smell hit so hard I actually stepped back and looked around, embarrassed, like someone would see my face and know what I was thinking. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. I stood still, heart thumping, listening. Cars, people talking, a cart clattering, normal life. Nothing in the bushes, nothing behind the cars, nothing on the asphalt. And still, for that brief moment, my body did what it did in that valley. It prepared to run. That's why I'm writing this down. Not because I want anyone to believe in something supernatural, and not because I think the Appalachians are hiding a monster behind every tree. It's because there are places out there that don't feel like they belong to the same set of rules as the rest of the world, and you can stumble into them by accident if you're careless and curious. And if you're unlucky enough to catch someone, or something, watching you from the underbrush, you might get out. You might make it back to your truck, back to your home, back to a normal day. But a part of you stays in that pocket of dark, and every once in a while, when the air is wrong in a harmless place, it comes back to you in the simplest way possible. A smell you can't explain, a memory your brain won't sand down, and the certainty that you were seen. I'm going to sound crazy, I know I am. If someone had told me this story a week ago, I would have laughed in their face and told them to lay off the campfire whiskey. I am an experienced outdoorsman. I grew up tracking in the Pacific Northwest, and for the last decade, I've been doing solo excursions into some of the deepest pockets of Appalachia. I know what bears look like when they have mange. I know the weird screaming sounds bobcats make. I know what a sick deer looks like, and I know what a healthy deer looks like, and I know how different the woods feel when something big is moving through them. Or, I thought I did. I need to get this down while my hands are still shaking, while the adrenaline is still hot in my veins, because part of my brain is already trying to sand the edges off. It's already offering me explanations. Sleep deprivation, stress, imagination. The way shadows look wrong when you're alone long enough. I keep catching myself reaching for the most comfortable answer. That's the scary part. Not what happened out there. The scary part is how fast my mind is willing to lie to me so I can function. 4 days ago, I drove out to a remote access point on the Tennessee and North Carolina border, one of those places where the pavement turns to gravel and then the gravel turns to rutted dirt. and then the road just stops and becomes a suggestion. There are trails in that region, if you want them. But my whole point was getting away from trails. I wanted the kind of quiet you can't buy. I wanted to scout for the upcoming season, mark a few waypoints, find water sources that don't show up on the easy maps, and spend a couple nights alone in a place that doesn't care whether you exist. I packed like I always do, hammock set up with a rainfly, underquilt, a small stove, water filter, headlamp, backup batteries, med kit, emergency blanket, cordage, knife, a little bit of food that doesn't require thinking. I carried a satellite communicator because I'm not stupid, and I told my wife roughly where I'd be because I'm not selfish. I had a paper map, a compass, and GPS on my phone, and I had a .44 on my hip for bears. Not because I'm looking to play cowboy, but because I've had two close encounters with black bears in thick brush, and I promised myself I wouldn't be helpless if one decided I was food. The first 12 miles were hard but normal. Bushwhacking always is. You're fighting laurel, stepping over blowdowns, sliding down slick leaf-covered slopes where the ground is basically ball bearings, and you're constantly making small decisions. Left of that boulder, right of that deadfall, drop into that drainage, climb out here. I moved slow and deliberate, like I always do, because getting hurt out there is how you die, and getting lost out there is how you become a story. Late afternoon, I found what I was looking for. A rocky creek bed with water still moving even in a dry stretch, and a slightly elevated bank with 2 solid trees at the right distance from my hammock. The air smelled like damp leaves and hemlock, and there was that steady, reassuring sound of water over stone. I set the hammock, strung the tarp, filtered water, ate, and watched the light fade the way it always does under a dense canopy. Fast and absolute, like someone closing a door. That first night was fine. Standard noises, far-off owl, occasional squirrel doing whatever squirrels do at midnight, a couple of deer moving through leaves. I slept in chunks, woke up once or twice, checked the fire I'd built small and safe, and drifted back off. The second day started fine too. Fog in the low areas, thin beams of light cutting through the trees, everything wet. I moved around my camp, looked for sign, took a few pictures of tracks near the creek, and did what I came to do. Around late morning, I started noticing little things that didn't fit. The first was a set of prints in a soft patch near the water. Hoof prints, but not right. Too long. The split looked too deep, like toes instead of the normal clean split of a deer. And the stride was weird. Deer don't walk like that. They have a rhythm. These prints looked like something heavy trying to imitate that rhythm and failing, like a person trying to walk in someone else's shoes. I told myself it was mud distortion. I told myself it was a deer with an injury. I told myself what I always tell myself, don't get spooked by one odd detail. Around noon, the vibe shifted. If you've been deep enough in the woods, you know what I mean without me trying to make it poetic. There's a normal background layer, birds, insects, the soft, constant chatter of life. Even when it's quiet, it's not quiet than anything we'd done. But it showed us on a known trail system closer to a different trailhead, still remote, but connected. I don't know how to explain that transition. I don't know if we climbed out of whatever pocket we'd fallen into, or if it let us go because it got what it wanted, or if some other rule saved us when we refused the crack. We followed that trail downhill in the dark with my headlamp bouncing, Mara limping and leaning on me. We moved for hours. We saw distant headlights at one point and cried with relief like children. We eventually reached a parking area with cars, real cars, a cooler in the back of a truck, a dog barking, a man in a flannel who stared at us like we were ghosts. He asked if we were okay, and I tried to explain. Lost, injury, no service. And the words came out broken and stupid because my brain was still stuck on the image of myself smiling from inside rock. He drove us to where we could get help. Search and rescue got involved briefly, mostly to make sure we weren't leaving someone else out there. They asked if we'd seen anyone on the trail. I said yes because I couldn't not. I described the elderly man in all black gear. One of the SAR guys, an older man with a weathered face, stopped writing and looked up. All black? He repeated. Yes, I said. He exchanged a look with someone else. The other person, a woman with a radio clipped to her vest, went very still. Did he have a black cap? The SR guy asked, careful. Yes. Clean gear? He asked. Yes, Mara whispered, voice hoarse. The SR guy exhaled slowly, like someone who just had a suspicion confirmed. Then he said, "Okay," in a tone that meant the opposite of okay. "Where exactly did you see him?" We told them as best we could, pointing on a map. The SAR guy's jaw tightened. "That trail doesn't dead end," he said, more to himself than to us. I stared at him. It did. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was measuring whether I was delirious. "It doesn't," he said again. "Not on any of the maps, not on any of our routes. It climbs to a ridge and continues, unless you went off trail." "We didn't," I said automatically, and then remembered we had gone off trail to avoid him, and my stomach sank because my own narrative was already starting to tangle. Mara spoke up. "We followed the trail until it stopped." The SR guy's eyes flicked to hers, then away. He scribbled something, then closed his notebook. "I'm going to be straight with you," he said, lowering his voice. "People get turned around out there more than they think. It's steep. It messes with your sense of distance. Exhaustion and fear do weird things." I nodded because that's what you do when someone offers you a lifeline back to normal. Then he added quietly, "But you're not the first to describe someone in black on that line." My mouth went dry again. "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head slightly like he'd decided he didn't want to be responsible for planting something in our minds. "Just get checked out," he said, "and don't go back up there." They treated Mara's ankle. A bad sprain, not broken. They gave us water and blankets. They asked more questions. They eventually let us go. We drove back to Gardner in silence. The town lights looked unreal. The smell of food from a restaurant made me nauseous. I kept expecting to see black gear in the rearview mirror. Back at our rental, Mara showered with the door open because she didn't want to be alone. I sat on the bathroom floor and stared at my watch data. This is the part that still makes me feel like I'm going to crawl out of my skin. The GPS track from my watch showed our route. It showed us climbing the trail like normal. It showed the spot where we passed the elderly man, marked by a brief slowdown. Then it showed 5 miles of steady progress. Then, near the supposed dead end, the track did something I've never seen. It doubled back on itself in a tight loop, like we'd been running in a small circle, except we hadn't. Then it showed a straight line jump, like the one I'd seen earlier, off the trail into nothing. Then it went blank for a stretch. No data. Then it resumed on a completely different trail system miles away, exactly where we'd found the normal trail at the end. As if a hand had picked us up and set us down. Mara's phone had something worse. She'd taken a photo earlier on the climb, a quick shot of the valley with the trail snaking below. We looked at it because we wanted proof we'd been there, proof it was real. In the bottom left corner of the frame, partially hidden behind a tree, was a smear of black. At first I thought it was shadow. Then I zoomed in. It was the elderly man, standing off trail in the trees, watching us. But the timestamp on the photo was from before we'd passed him on the trail. As if he'd been ahead of us in the woods, waiting, while another version stood on the trail to let us pass. Mara started shaking so hard she couldn't hold the phone. That night, neither of us slept. Every time the wind moved outside, I heard that voice inside rocks saying my name. The next morning, Mara asked me something I didn't want to answer. "Did you pick that trail?" she said, sitting on the edge of the bed, eyes raw. "Yes," I admitted. "Why that one?" she asked. "Why not something normal?" I opened my mouth to say because it looked fun, or because it was empty, but the truth was uglier. Because on the first day we'd arrived, at a coffee shop, I'd seen a flyer on a bulletin board. Not a glossy park poster, a cheap printout, a missing person notice, an older man, gray hair, a photo that looked like it was taken in the 2000s. The name was blurred in my memory now, but I remember the words, "last seen," and the general area. I'd looked at it and then looked away, because those flyers are everywhere near wild places, and you either let them haunt you, or you learn to compartmentalize. But I'd also thought stupidly, "We'll be careful, we'll be fine." I told Mara about the flyer. She stared at me, and there was a coldness in her expression that hurt more than anger. "Do you think that was him?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, and my voice sounded like someone else's. "I don't know if he was him." Mara swallowed, eyes shining. "Do you think he's dead?" The honest answer is that I don't know if dead is even the right category for what we met. Because here's what keeps me up. If that man was a missing person, why was his gear clean? Why did he act like he was waiting? Why did he know our names? And if he wasn't human, why did he care about timing? Why did he say wrong day, like some schedule mattered? Why did he say not yet, like he was negotiating with something in the basin? And why? This is the part I can't say out loud to anyone in real life. Why did the thing in the rock look like me? I wish I could tell you the story ends with a ranger explaining a weird GPS glitch, or with us discovering the real trail junction we missed, or with a rational answer that makes this all a stress-induced hallucination. But the end is smaller and worse. We left early. We cut the trip short. We drove away from the park and its edges and its big open skies. We went back to our apartment, back to normal. Mara healed. Her ankle is fine now. She runs again. I run too, but something changed in me. I don't like narrow single track on steep slopes anymore. I don't like dead quiet timber. I don't like places where the trail feels like a string. Sometimes, when I'm running in my own neighborhood, I'll pass someone dressed in black, just a normal person on a morning walk, and my chest tightens so hard I have to stop. And every once in a while, I'll check my watch data after a run and see a brief straight line jump, a tiny glitch where GPS drift cuts across a block, and my hands will start to shake because my brain immediately goes back to that overgrown dead end, and the man half inside leaves, and that smile that didn't belong on a human face. I haven't told my parents. I haven't told most of my friends. I haven't posted this anywhere under my real name. I'm posting it here because if you tell people in your life that you met something impossible near Yellowstone, they either laugh or they look at you with pity, or they decide you're the kind of person who wants attention. I don't want attention. I want an answer. Or, failing that, I want one simple thing. For someone who reads this and recognizes the pattern, the black gear, the dead end that shouldn't exist, the way time slips and the trail becomes a line you can't escape, to take it seriously enough to not go up there and see for themselves. Because the worst part isn't that we saw him ahead of us when he should have been behind. The worst part is what I realized later, staring at Mara's photo with that black smear in the corner. We didn't pass him and then meet him again. We passed one of him, and the one that mattered was already ahead of us, waiting at the end, before we ever set foot on that trail. Like the trail wasn't leading us up a mountain. Like it was leading us to an appointment. And for 30 minutes, 5 miles, one steep single track with no shortcuts or forks, we ran hard to make it on time. There were 5 of us. I'll use first names only, and I'm changing the last names because I don't want this turning into a scavenger hunt. It was me, Caleb, Morgan, Travis, and Jenna. We were all in our late 20s, all working too much, all telling each other we needed to do something normal for a weekend. By normal, we meant driving a few hours out of the city, putting phones away, sleeping in a tent, cooking something over a camp stove, and pretending the world couldn't reach us for 2 nights. We picked a state forest that sits on the edge of a bigger stretch of timberland. It's not a secret place. It's the kind of place with a trailhead sign, a map kiosk, and a self-serve station where you write your plate number and the dates you'll be there. There are hunters there in the fall and hikers there in the summer, and families doing the short loop near the creek. We went in early fall, that time of year when the mornings are cold enough to make your breath visible and the afternoons are still warm in the sun. The plan was simple. Hike in a few miles to a backcountry site by a small lake, camp one night, do a longer day hike the next day, camp again, hike out the following morning. Nothing heroic. We weren't deep in some untouched wilderness. We had a printed map and a downloaded offline map on 2 phones. Caleb had a small GPS unit clipped to his pack strap because he liked gadgets. A section of torn pant leg that we recognized as Travis's hiking pants. And it had blood on it too. The blood was fresh enough that it made the surrounding leaves stick together. Travis dropped to his knees and started pulling at the brush, calling his own name like he expected an answer. Caleb grabbed him and pulled him back, not gently. Morgan told them to stop moving things and look for tracks. Jenna was crying quietly, shoulders shaking, but she was still scanning and stepping carefully, trying to act like her body wasn't falling apart. We did what untrained people do in an emergency. We made it worse by moving around a lot. We trampled the area. We scattered our own scent. We called out. We climbed over fallen logs and pushed into thickets and came back. We found more torn fabric and one boot, Caleb's boot, the one with the red laces, lying on its side like it had been placed there. Caleb stood over it and stared, his mouth open slightly, like he was trying to force his brain to accept what his eyes were seeing. Caleb was still wearing both his boots. That's the point where I realized something, was messing with us intentionally. It wasn't random. It wasn't a bear dragging a bag. It wasn't an accident on a slope. There was a pattern. Our things were being replicated and displayed. Our faces carved into a rifle, blood introduced like a message, the scream used like bait. Morgan said, in a voice I'll never forget, because it was so controlled, "We are leaving, right now, together, on the trail." Travis refused. He wanted to keep searching. Jenna wanted to keep searching too, but she kept looking over her shoulder as if she expected those yellow eyes to appear between branches. Caleb looked like he was balancing on the edge of panic. I didn't want to leave either, because leaving felt like abandoning them. But I also knew we were about to become the next missing person story if we stayed and wandered in brush with no plan. We compromised again, because that's what groups do, even when compromise is a trap. We said we'd go back to camp, grab the big packs, and hike out immediately while it was still daylight. We'd get to the trailhead, find signal, call for help, and then guide search and rescue back in. It wasn't heroic, it was practical. It was also the last time our weekend still had a solution that made sense. We moved back to the campsite fast, eyes scanning constantly. The campsite looked wrong when we arrived, not destroyed, not obviously ransacked, just rearranged. Our gear pile was spread out more than we left it. The bear canister was farther away. The fire ring had fresh ash, like someone had stirred it. And there were hoof prints in the soft soil around the tents, but the hoof shape was off. It was like a deer print, and then not, like the front edge was too long, the split too wide. Morgan crouched and stared at them for a long time without speaking. Caleb tried his phone again. No signal. Jenna tried hers. Nothing. Travis threw his phone down on the ground in frustration and then immediately picked it up like he was afraid of breaking the only connection to the outside world. We packed in a rush. Not sloppy, but urgent. You could feel the dread building because the forest felt tighter, like the space between trees had shrunk. Every sound made us flinch. A twig snap sounded like a footstep. A bird call sounded like a scream starting. We started out. Single file, faster than a hike but not quite a run because we had heavy packs. Morgan insisted we stay together and keep Jenna in the middle because she was the smallest and the most shaken. Caleb went in front with his headlamp ready even though it was still daylight, like he wanted a weapon made of light. Travis stayed back, turning constantly, scanning behind us. We made it back to the spot where we found the rifle and it was gone. Not moved, not knocked down, gone. The tree trunk where it had leaned was bare. The ground where the butt had rested didn't even show a mark. I looked at the area around it, expecting to see disturbed leaves. I didn't. It was as if it had never been there. We kept moving because stopping to process that would have broken us. About 40 minutes later, on a section of trail where the trees tighten and the light filters in green, we heard something behind us that sounded like a wet inhale. Travis spun around, and at the same time, the yellow eyes appeared between two trunks maybe 20 yards back, not at the edge of vision. Clear, bright, level with our chest height now, not knee height, as if whatever it was had risen. Jenna made a small choking sound. Morgan grabbed her pack strap and pulled her forward. Caleb lifted his headlamp and aimed it, though the sun was still strong enough that a headlamp beam should have meant nothing. The yellow eyes didn't blink. They didn't dim. They stayed fixed. Then we heard hooves, not one animal trotting. Multiple impacts, rapid, coming from different angles, like something circling while staying just out of sight. The brush to our left shivered. The brush to our right shivered. But we saw no bodies, only movement and those eyes behind us, steady as if pinned to us. Caleb said, "Run," and we did. I don't remember the next stretch cleanly. I remember fragments, Jenna stumbling and Morgan yanking her upright without stopping, my lungs burning like fire. Travis shouting behind us, words I couldn't make out. The sound of something moving through brush parallel to the trail, matching our pace without ever fully revealing itself. The way the yellow eyes would appear ahead sometimes, not behind. as if the creature had jumped positions. That was one of the most terrifying parts, because it made the forest feel like a closed room. You can deal with something behind you. You can't deal with something that can be behind you and then ahead of you without you seeing it pass. At one point, we reached a narrow section where the trail goes between two fallen logs like a corridor. Morgan was in front of me. Jenna was right behind her. Caleb was ahead. Travis was behind me. We were moving in a tight line, almost tripping over each other. And then there was a scream again, right up close, not ahead or behind, but to the side, as if someone stood 3 feet away in the brush and screamed into our ears. Jenna shrieked and veered off the trail for half a step, then snapped back. Morgan yelled at her to stay on the trail. Caleb stopped for a fraction of a second to look to the side and then kept going. When we came out of that narrow corridor, I looked back. Travis was gone. It wasn't gradual. He wasn't falling behind. He wasn't bent over tying a shoe. 1 second he was there, a few feet behind me, and the next second the trail behind was empty, except for our footprints and one trekking pole lying across the dirt like it had been dropped. The pole was Travis's. I recognized the tape without deciding to. That's what fear does. It decides for you. My hand found my headlamp and I didn't turn it on. I didn't unzip the tent. I listened and waited for the sound to fade because part of me still wanted it to be an animal. And animals leave if you don't react. The footsteps stopped. Then from somewhere back in the trees, I heard a low whistle. It wasn't a bird call. It wasn't wind. It was a simple human whistle. 2 notes, then nothing. I stayed frozen until my lungs burned. Eventually I forced myself to breathe again, slow and quiet. I didn't sleep after that. I waited for morning with my eyes open, listening for every small sound. When the gray light finally came through the fabric, I unzipped the tent and looked out. Mason was sitting on a log with his boots on, his pack half open, staring at the trees like he'd been doing it for an hour. "You hear it too?" he asked. I didn't ask what it was, I just nodded. We didn't talk much as we packed. We ate cold food because neither of us wanted to make a fire. We took down the food hang and checked it. Nothing was missing. No obvious claw marks. The rope looked normal. And then we found Mason's satellite messenger. It was still clipped to his shoulder strap, exactly where it should have been. The problem was that the clip was open. He stared at it, then unclipped it and looked closer. The little plastic gate that locks the carabiner had been twisted, not broken, just rotated in a way that it wouldn't lock properly anymore. Someone could have opened it with fingers, slipped it off, and put it back. Someone could have done it in the dark, quietly, without stepping on the tent fabric while we slept a few feet away. Mason's face went pale in a slow, controlled way. He didn't panic. He didn't swear. He just stared at the clip and said, "Someone touched my pack." My mouth went dry. We left camp fast. We told ourselves it could have been a coincidence. A branch snagged the clip, a manufacturing flaw, anything. But neither of us believed it. We didn't say the word person yet, not out loud, but it was already sitting between us. By midday the weather changed, the light flattened. The clouds dropped lower, and the trees started to drip even when it wasn't raining. The trail narrowed in places where slides had eaten the edge. We moved carefully, more focused now, less relaxed. And then we started seeing the footprints. At first it was just one print in a patch of mud near a puddle. A boot sole with a distinct pattern, not ours. Then another print. Then a set, not always clear, but enough to tell someone had come through recently. The stride looked normal, not limping, not running, just walking, on the same trail, in the same direction. Mason crouched once and held his hand over the print without touching it, measuring the size. Bigger than mine, maybe by a full size, wider too. "Could be someone ahead of us," I said. Mason's eyes flicked up. Why would they be ahead of us and still be leaving fresh prints? I looked at the mud around the print and realized what he meant. The edges of the imprint were sharp. The water in it hadn't filled in yet. In this kind of wet, prints soften fast. These were new. We walked again. We found another print, then another. Not constant, not like someone was marching in a straight line, but like they were stepping off the trail and back on, circling around, then returning. That afternoon we reached a stretch where the trail crossed a small clearing. Not a meadow, just a place where the canopy had opened after old blowdown, and you could see the gray sky. The clearing was ringed with downed logs and tangles of branches. The trail cut straight through it. Halfway across, Mason stopped so abruptly I almost walked into him. He pointed. On the far side of the clearing, partially hidden behind a thick trunk, was a person. At first I saw only a shape, a shoulder, a head. Then the person leaned slightly, just enough to look at us. The distance wasn't huge, maybe 80 yards, close enough that I could see their clothing was dark, a jacket that blended into the tree bark. Close enough that I could see they weren't wearing bright colors, no orange, no reflective gear. Close enough that I could see they were standing still, watching. I raised my hand, more out of reflex than friendliness. "Hey," I called, forcing my voice to sound normal. "You okay?" The person didn't answer. Mason's voice stayed low. "Don't wave. Don't do that." "It's just someone," I said, but I didn't believe it. The person moved then, not toward us, away. They stepped behind the trunk and disappeared into the trees on the far side like they'd never been there. We stood there for a second longer than we should have. The clearing felt suddenly exposed, like we were the ones on display. "Keep moving," Mason said. We walked faster. That night we didn't stop at the planned camp. We pushed on until we found a spot that wasn't on the map. A small rise off the trail with thick understory that would hide us from anyone walking past. We set up in a hurry, keeping lights dim. We didn't cook. We ate dry food again. We hung the food farther away than usual. We tried to act like people who weren't afraid, even though our hands shook when we tied knots. I told myself that the person in the clearing could have been a hiker who didn't want to interact. Some people are strange. Some people don't talk. But the image of them standing behind the trunk and watching us wouldn't leave my head. It wasn't the act itself that got me. It was the stillness. The way they didn't wave back, didn't call out, didn't step fully into view. The way they chose concealment automatically, like it was habit. That night, the whistle came again. This time it was closer. 2 notes, a pause, 2 notes again. The same simple pattern. Mason and I lay in our tents with our headlamps off, listening. I could hear Mason's breathing through the thin fabric. I could hear my own heartbeat. The whistle came again, a little farther to the left. Then again, farther behind us, like someone circling. At some point, a twig snapped close enough that it sounded like it was right beside my tent. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw hurt. I wanted to shout. I wanted to throw open the zipper and blind whoever was out there with light. I wanted to do something that would make me feel like I had control. I did none of it. I lay there and listened and waited and hated myself for being quiet. In the morning, we found the first of the markers. Someone had stacked small stones in a neat column right in the middle of the trail where it passed near our hidden camp. A cairn. That wouldn't be weird on its own. People build cairns all the time, sometimes for navigation, sometimes just because they're bored. But this cairn had something on top. A small strip of cloth tied in a knot. It was a piece of nylon, frayed at the ends. It was the same color as the strap on Mason's pack. Mason stared at it for a long time. Then he reached out, grabbed it, and pulled it free. The cloth came away easily, like it had been placed there for him to find. He held it up, and we could both see the stitching. It wasn't just the same color, it was the same material. It looked like it had been cut cleanly off something, like someone had taken a knife to Mason's gear during the night and removed a strip without waking him. Mason's hands tightened until the cloth bunched in his fist. "That's it," he said, and his voice cracked a little on the last word. "We turn around." I nodded too fast because relief flashed through me. Turning around meant moving toward the trailhead, toward the car, toward other people. The problem was that when we tried to turn around, the trail behind us didn't look like the trail we'd come in on. I don't mean it was magically different. I mean the details were wrong in ways that didn't add up. A fallen log that we'd climbed over the day before was now shifted, as if it had been dragged. Fresh bark scraped off one side. The muddy spot where we'd seen the distinct boot prints was churned up, like someone had walked back and forth there repeatedly. And the nearest junction, the one that should have taken us back toward the loop's starting point, had a new sign on it. A fresh board nailed to the post, pointing the wrong direction. Mason stopped so hard he swayed under his pack. "That wasn't there," he said. I knew it wasn't because I remembered the original sign. Clean lettering, proper trail number. This new board was crude. Dark wood, wet with rain, with letters carved too deep. "Back this way." The arrow pointed down the right fork, not the left. Mason looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the first true panic, contained but real. "He's messing with us," he said. I didn't argue. I didn't try to rationalize. Because the most frightening part was that he was rounded the bend, and I raised both arms without thinking, not to wave, but to make myself bigger, to be seen. The truck stopped hard. The driver leaned out, an older guy in a battered cap, eyes sharp. He looked at our faces, at Caleb's torn jacket, at the dirt ground into our skin, and his expression changed in a way I won't forget, because it wasn't surprise. It was recognition. He asked us where we'd come from, and when I tried to answer, my voice cracked and I couldn't get the words out fast enough. Caleb said, "We need to get out," and the man stared past us into the trees for a long second like he was checking whether we were alone. Then he told us to get in the bed of the truck, not the cab, and he said it like it wasn't a suggestion. We climbed in without arguing, hands shaking, and he drove. In the back of that truck, bouncing over ruts, I watched the tree line the whole time. I expected to see it sprinting along the forest edge, matching our speed, staying just out of sight. I expected to hear that voice again, to feel it trying to pull us back with a name. The man didn't talk much. When we asked him where he was going, he told us he'd take us to the main road, and then to our vehicle, if we could tell him where it was. When we tried to tell him what we saw, the deer, the voice, the tracks, he cut us off once, not angry, just firm, and he said, "Don't." He didn't say we were lying. He didn't say we were imagining it. He said, "Don't talk about it up here." At one point, he slowed down and spit out the window, and he said, almost to himself, "If it followed you this far, you're lucky it let you go." I tried to ask what he meant, but he didn't answer. He just drove faster. He got us back to the area where our car was parked near dark. The sight of it made me feel weak, because it meant the world we came from still existed, that we hadn't been swallowed whole. We climbed down, thanked him too many times, and he didn't accept the thanks. He watched the trees again while we unlocked the car, and he told us to leave the mountain now, not in the morning, not after rest, now. Caleb started to say something, and the man lifted a hand and pointed once down the road, a clean motion that ended the conversation. We got in the car. I started it. The engine sounded like safety. As we pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him still parked there, still watching the tree line, like he was waiting for something to step out so he could know whether it was truly over. We drove until town lights showed up, until there were other cars, until there were signs and stores and normal sounds. We didn't stop talking about it right away because we didn't have the words. Caleb kept touching the torn part of his jacket like he needed proof it happened. I kept checking the mirrors like the road behind us might grow antlers. When we finally stopped for gas, I stood under the harsh lights and felt my body start to shake now that it had permission. We made the decision that night without drama. We didn't say we'd go back with more people, or better gear, or a gun, or a plan. We didn't say we'd prove anything. We said we were done. We said those woods could keep whatever they had, because we had already given them enough. So yeah, at the end of it, we are never going into those mountains again. Not that section, not that trailhead, not that kind of deep quiet where you feel like your own footsteps are an announcement. People hear a story like this and they want a name for what it was, because a name makes it manageable. I don't give it a name. I don't know what it was wearing when it wore the shape of a deer. I don't know why it followed us for days instead of ending it fast. I only know the feeling of being observed with patience, the sound of my name coming out of an animal mouth, the way the forest went silent in moving pieces, and the fact that when we finally got out it felt less like escape and more like being released. And I don't ever want to feel that again. I'm going to tell this the way I've told it to 2 therapists, 1 deputy, and exactly 1 person who knew the cabin's owner well enough to make a call that got returned. I'm not going to dress it up, and I'm not going to pretend I understand everything that happened. I also want to say this up front because people love labels. I'm going to use the phrase skinwalker-like the same way people say wolf-like when they mean it moved like a wolf and made me think of a wolf. I'm not Navajo. I'm not going to borrow anyone's beliefs as a prop. The Appalachian Mountains have their own old stories, boogers, haints, things you don't call by name after dark, And whatever we ran into out there fits better into that category anyway. Something that steals familiarity, uses it like a tool, and leaves you arguing with yourself about whether your senses can be trusted. This happened on a week-long cabin trip in the Appalachians in mid-October. The kind of week where the leaves look like the whole mountain's been lit from underneath. But the shadows between the trunks are already winter dark. There were 4 of us, me, my wife Nora, my closest friend from college, Eric, and Eric's younger sister, Maddie, who joined because she'd just gotten out of a messy relationship and wanted a reset. We booked a cabin that was advertised as remote, authentic, historic, which is realtor language for, you won't have cell service and nobody will hear you if you scream. We wanted that. I'm self-employed and always on. Nora was coming off a brutal stretch at work. Eric and Maddie had both been living in apartments where you can hear your neighbors sneeze. We wanted to go somewhere you could sit on a porch and hear nothing but wind, and maybe a creek. We wanted to feel small in a good way. The listing was a little too perfect. Hand-hewn logs, cast iron stove, original spring house. Historic property once used as a way station for early settlers and later a logging family. Photos of a porch swing, a gravel driveway, mist hanging low over a ridge. A note in the rules, no pets, no exceptions. That stood out because most cabins in that area advertise dog-friendly, like it's a religious doctrine. The owner's name was Cal, and all communication went through short messages that sounded friendly but controlled. If I asked a question, I got an answer that addressed exactly what I asked, and nothing more. Like a man who'd learned the hard way what happens when you volunteer extra information. We drove in 2 vehicles because we had a week's worth of groceries, hiking gear, and Eric's borderline ridiculous enthusiasm about bringing a small telescope. We left early to avoid weekend traffic, and the drive itself was normal. Highways into state routes into narrower roads, narrow roads into roads with names that sounded like warnings. The last half hour was gravel. Not the nice, graded kind you see in subdivisions. The kind with deep ruts and fist-sized stones that ping the underside of your car and make you question your choices. The forest closed in, and the ridgelines kept stacking, one behind another, like you were driving into a layered photograph. The first odd thing happened before we even reached the cabin. We passed a handmade sign nailed to a tree at the edge of a pull-off. It was just a plank with black paint, the letters uneven like someone had done it in a hurry. It said, "Turn back after dark." No name of a property, no phone number, nothing official. It wasn't the kind of no trespassing sign you see everywhere. It felt personal. Eric laughed and said it was probably a Halloween decoration. Maddie took a photo through the window. Nora didn't laugh, but she didn't argue. She just looked at it too long, like she was trying to decide if it was a joke or a message meant for one person. The cabin sat at the end of a short spur off the gravel road, tucked into a bowl of trees with one open view toward a lower ridge. It was exactly like the pictures, which should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like arriving at a set after the crew has gone home. Everything was placed correctly, and that made it feel staged. The porch was wide, the swing hung from thick chains, and there were wind chimes made from cut metal tubes that looked too heavy to move much in a breeze. The front door had 2 locks, a normal deadbolt and a second one that was older, like something you'd see on a cellar door. There was also a hook and eye latch higher than eye level, placed like it was meant to keep something out, or keep someone in. Inside, it smelled like cold wood and old smoke. There were thick braided rugs, iron cookware, a faded quilt over the back of a couch. Everything clean, but not hotel clean. Clean like someone had come through and made sure nothing obvious could hurt you, but also like nobody had lived there recently. I remember noticing the windows right away. Not the glass. Those were new enough, but the frames. The inside edges had scratches, long and shallow, easy confidence, letting us pass, as if it had simply wanted to deliver that message. We drove the rest of the gravel road in a kind of blind urgency, the forest whipping by, every shadow feeling like it could break loose and chase. When we hit pavement, real pavement, I felt my throat unclench slightly. Civilization has a smell, exhaust, cut grass, distant industry. We drove until we found a small sheriff's substation in a town that looked like a postcard someone had forgotten to update. We pulled into the lot like refugees. The deputy who took our statement was polite, in the way people are polite when they've already decided what category you fall into. He listened, nodded, asked about alcohol, asked if we'd taken any drugs, asked if we were into that spooky stuff. When Eric mentioned the voices, the deputy's eyes flicked to Maddie like he was checking if she was the type to exaggerate. When I mentioned the cut cables, he asked if we'd had any disputes with locals, and then wrote something down that I couldn't see. I offered to take him to the cabin. He said they'd send someone later. He told us not to go back. He said it was probably bears and probably pranksters. He said October brings weirdos. He was careful not to say anything that admitted the possibility of something truly abnormal, because admitting that would mean responsibility. Before we left, I asked if anyone had gone missing in that area recently. The deputy hesitated just long enough to be noticeable, then said, "People go missing in the mountains. It's a big place." And then he changed the subject to our license plates. We drove home without stopping except for gas and coffee and bathroom breaks, like we were trying to outrun a thought. The whole ride, none of us played music. None of us wanted extra noise. I kept thinking about the notebook, heavy in my bag, like a lead weight of history. In the weeks afterward, normal life resumed in the way it always does. Bills, work, emails. But the cabin followed us in small ways. Nora started locking the deadbolt the moment the sun set, even though we live in a safe neighborhood. Maddie stopped sleeping with her bedroom door open. Eric, who'd always mocked paranormal anything, refused to talk about it at all, like language might invite it back. I read the notebook slowly, page by page, over several nights. I didn't tell Nora at first because she needed the event to stay contained, to remain in the past where it belonged. The entries got worse as October progressed. The writer described men hearing their own voices calling from the woods. He described finding deer carcasses arranged. He described a thing that would stand at the edge of firelight and watch, learning faces. And then the last entry, dated October 31st, was short. "It wore my brother's voice today. I saw it move wrong. It is not a man in a mask. It is a borrower. If you read this, do not answer it. Do not go to it. Let it starve on your silence." I tried to find information about H.L. McRae, not online gossip, real records, old census documents, logging camp rosters. I found a reference to a Harold McRae in that county in the 1930s, listed as a laborer. I found a mention in a local history blog about a McRae boy who died in a fall near an old grade. Nothing definitive. The mountains keep their paperwork sloppy. I also tried to contact Cal through the rental platform. His account vanished. The listing was gone. Not unavailable. Gone. Like it had never existed. When I called the phone number that had texted Eric, it was disconnected. A month later, a small local news article popped up in my feed. Not because I followed that area, but because algorithms love stories about missing hikers. The headline was bland. 2 tourists reported missing after weekend trip. Different names, different circumstances. But the location was close enough that my stomach turned. The article quoted the sheriff's office saying it was likely a navigation issue and wildlife. The comments were full of people joking about mountain boogers. That was when I did the thing I'd sworn I wouldn't do. I went back. Not to the cabin, not onto that property, but to the town. I needed to know whether we'd been singled out, or whether we'd stumbled into something that happened in cycles like the turning of leaves. I took the notebook with me, wrapped in a towel like it was fragile. In town, I found a small historical society in a converted house, run by an older woman named Mrs. Larkin, who had the kind of patience that comes from years of listening to people romanticize your home. I introduced myself, said I'd stayed in a cabin nearby, said I'd found an old notebook. I did not lead with voice-stealing creature, because I wanted her to keep talking. When she saw the name on the first page, H.L. McRae, her face changed subtly. Not fear exactly, more like recognition of a story she'd heard too many times. She asked where I'd found it. I hesitated, then told her enough. Her mouth tightened. "That property," she said, choosing her words carefully, "has a history." I asked what kind. She sighed and leaned back, fingers folded. There were logging camps up those hollers in the early 20th century. Men came in from all over. Some never left. People blamed accidents, fever, drinking. But the old folks said the packs weren't trophies. They were evidence of a pattern. Hikers who never came out. People who became a rumor, a search party, a sad article. People whose names were pronounced with solemnity and then filed away. And somewhere in that system, there was the big thing in the woods, used, hunted, baited, angry. We stayed hidden until dusk again, too exhausted to move, too terrified to camp openly. We ate a few mouthfuls of food, forced water down. Luke's wrists were raw from rope. His face was swollen. His speech was slow, like he'd been hit hard. I asked him, quietly, what happened when he was pulled. Luke's eyes unfocused for a moment, then he swallowed. It was a man, he whispered. Hands, rough. He covered my mouth. He shuddered. They dragged me. They kept whistling, like dogs. His gaze flicked to me, ashamed. I thought it was you calling me. I know, I whispered. Luke's voice went smaller. They took me to the hollow, Glenn. He acted like I was a joke, like I was entertainment. Tessa's jaw clenched. Luke stared into nothing. And I heard it, he whispered. The big thing, not like a whoop, like it was right outside the shed, scraping, sniffing, and then he swallowed hard. Then I heard it say my name. My stomach turned. Luke. I know, he whispered, trembling. I know it sounds insane, but I heard Luke. Like a person saying it with a mouth full of mud. He pressed his palms to his eyes. I don't know what's worse, if it was real or if my brain is just breaking. Tessa stared at the darkening woods, voice flat. It's real enough, she said. Day 6. We try for the road and the mountain tries to keep us. The next day was the hardest physically, and that's saying something. We had no messenger, no phone signal, no clear trail, just a half-remembered sense that downhill would eventually lead to something human. An access road, a power line cut, a creek that met a bigger creek. But downhill in those mountains can also lead to cliffs, dead ends, private land, or another hollow where the wrong people live. We moved slow because Luke was hurt. He could walk, but his balance was off, and his left ankle was swollen from being dragged. Every time he stepped on uneven ground, he winced and hissed through his teeth. Tessa took point, checking constantly for signs. Broken branches, boot prints, unnatural stillness. I watched our back, paranoid, jumping at every squirrel crash. We found the first sign they were following us before noon. In a muddy patch near a seep, there was a fresh boot print, not ours. Too wide, deeper tread. Tessa crouched, touched it lightly, then stood. They're close, she murmured. Luke's face went pale. Why? He whispered. We're leaving. Tessa's eyes were hard. Because you've seen their hollow, she said. Because they took your messenger, and they don't want you telling anybody they took it. Luke's throat worked. So what? They just kill people. Tessa didn't answer directly. She looked away. Sometimes folks go missing, she said quietly. Sometimes folks get blamed for their own disappearing. The day stretched long, the kind of long where your brain starts narrowing to simple tasks. Step, breathe, drink, step. The forest around us looked beautiful in a cruel way. Sunlight filtering through damp leaves, mushrooms bright against rot, the creek glittering. It didn't care about our fear. In the afternoon we heard knocking again, not far off, close enough that it made my chest vibrate. One knock, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 1. Luke froze. That's it, he whispered. That's the pattern. Tessa listened, head tilted. Another knock answered from farther away. Same pattern. Luke's eyes widened. It's talking. Tessa's face went tight. It's moving, she said. I whispered. Toward us? Tessa's gaze flicked to the trees uphill. Or around us, she whispered. We kept moving, faster despite Luke's limp. My heartbeat hammered in my ears. The knocks continued, spaced, like something pacing in parallel. Then, faintly, we heard a whistle, 2 notes. Tessa stopped dead. Luke whispered, That's them. Tessa nodded once, jaw clenched. Yeah, she whispered. The whistle came again, closer, and then from somewhere ahead on the creek, a human voice called out, cheerful as ever. Y'all all right? It was Glenn. Luke's face twisted. How? Tessa grabbed his sleeve. Don't answer, she hissed, echoing herself again, echoing the first warning like a curse. We left the creek, climbing steeply into thick brush to break the line. The climb was brutal. My calves burned. Luke stumbled, grunting. Tessa pushed through Laurel like she could force the mountain to open. Behind us, Glenn's voice called again, closer now. "Ain't no need to hide." Then in a different direction, off to our left, another voice called, softer. "Noah?" It sounded like Luke, or like a close imitation of Luke. Luke's head snapped toward it, eyes wide. His mouth opened. Tessa slapped a hand over his mouth hard. "No," she snarled, and Luke flinched like he'd been hit. We crawled through brush until the voices faded, until only wind and our own breathing remained. When we stopped, Luke's eyes were wet. "It's in my head," he whispered. Tessa shook her head. "It ain't," she whispered. "That thing can copy, and they learn to use it." That was one of the stranger twists of the whole ordeal. The creature's mimicry wasn't just a horror story detail. It had become a tool in a human system. The men used whistles to coordinate. The creature used voice to confuse. And somewhere those behaviors had tangled together until the mountain itself felt like a rigged game. Late afternoon, we reached something that looked like salvation. A cut line. A broad, straight slash through the trees, wide enough for power poles or gas lines, running over ridges like a scar. The undergrowth here was shorter. Sight lines were longer. It felt exposed, but it also felt like a place where hidden men couldn't move as easily without being seen. Tessa exhaled sharply. "This goes to a service road," she said. "If we follow it..." A crack sounded behind us, heavy brush breaking. We turned. On the edge of the trees, at the boundary of the cut line, stood the big creature. Fully visible now in the open line's gray light, it looked even less like a myth and more like a brutal fact. Tall, thick, hair wet and patchy, skin showing through in gray areas, shoulders hunched. It stood with arms slightly out from its sides, like it was balancing on the edge of the open space. Its head was tilted, eyes fixed on us. Luke whispered, trembling, "Oh my God." The creature didn't charge. It didn't retreat. It just stood there watching in a way that felt evaluative, like it was deciding what we were. Then from behind us, far off but distinct, a whistle sounded. 3 notes. The creature's head snapped slightly toward the sound. Then it looked back at us, and it made a sound, not words this time, but a low exhale that felt like a warning. Tessa's voice shook. "It don't want us in the open," she whispered. Luke's breath hitched. "Or it wants us trapped," he whispered. I didn't know which was worse. Another whistle, closer. Tessa grabbed my sleeve. "Move," she whispered, "down the line." We started down the cut line at a limping jog, exposed, praying the road was close. Behind us, the creature stepped forward 1 pace, then another, staying at the edge of the trees, paralleling us like it didn't want to step fully into the open, but didn't want to lose sight of us. The whistles behind us came again, closer now, and to our right. The men were moving too. For the first time, I felt a kind of helpless clarity. We were prey between 2 predators, one human, one not, and the only way out was to become loud enough that the human world noticed. The cut line dipped and rose, and after maybe 20 minutes, though time had stopped being reliable, we saw it. A gravel service road crossing the cut line, 2 tire ruts with grass in the center. There were fresh tracks. A truck had been here recently. Tessa's face lit with fierce hope. "Road," she whispered. We stumbled onto it, and then a voice called from the trees behind us, close now, gleeful. "There you are." Glenn stepped out onto the road about 30 yards behind us, rifle in hand, eyes bright. Ebb was with him, face red and swollen from wasn't a thing I had a category for. Then the flash ended, and the darkness came back, and suddenly I couldn't see them anymore. Not clearly. Without the light, it was just vague shapes low to the ground. I lowered my phone and stared through the fence, feeling my throat tighten, because I knew what I'd seen. I angled my phone and turned the screen brightness up, trying to use it like a flashlight without making it obvious. It helped a little. The bags were real. There were more than a few, a couple dozen at least. Some had condensation stains, like drinks had sat too long. Some looked sun-faded, and on 2 of them, I could read the printed date on the sticker because my eyes had locked onto it the way you lock onto a hazard in the road. One was from weeks earlier. Another was older than that. I stood there holding my customers' food and realized something simple and ugly. People had been sent here before me, and they had done exactly what I was doing. My phone vibrated in my hand. The app popped up a status update like it was trying to be helpful. Customers approaching. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear a gate. I didn't hear a car door. But I felt the shift, that instinctive thing where your body knows something is happening behind you. I turned my head slowly, keeping my shoulders as still as I could, and looked back toward the dead-end lane I'd driven in on. At first there was nothing. Then a figure separated from the darkness near the far end of the pavement, not stepping into view like someone walking out of a house. More like it had already been standing there, and the angle of my eyes finally caught it. The person didn't wave, didn't call out, didn't lift a phone screen so I could see a glow. They started moving toward me at a steady pace, and I remember thinking how strange it was that their movement looked practiced, like they weren't reacting to me, like they were following a route they'd walked many times. Every time I've replayed it, that's what makes my stomach drop. It wasn't a customer coming to get their food. It was someone doing a step in a routine. I backed away from the fence without turning my back on them, keeping the bag in my hand because I didn't know what else to do with it. My car was 10 feet behind me. I hit the unlock button without looking down, then pulled my driver door open and slipped inside fast. I shut it. I locked it. I set the bag on the floor because my hands were shaking and I didn't want it in my lap. The app was still on the delivery screen. I tapped "Can't hand to customer." I tapped "Issue with delivery." The loading wheel spun, then froze. No error message, just frozen. I glanced up. The figure was closer now, still moving steady, not rushing, not hesitating. They were dressed dark, hoodie or jacket, hands down, head level, no flashlight, no phone light. Their face was a blank area I couldn't make out, either because it was shadowed or because they were keeping it angled away. I hit cancel order. The app didn't respond. I swiped up, tried to switch to another app, and for a second my phone showed that it had signal, 1 or 2 bars, then dropped to no service. I don't know if it was a dead zone or something else. I just know it happened right when I needed it not to happen. Then my phone buzzed again. The DoorDash screen refreshed by itself, like someone on the other end had control over the timing. Customer added instructions. I stared at it, waiting for something normal like "leave on chair" or "beware of dog." What came up was one line. "Look at the gate camera." I remember saying out loud alone in my car, "No." Not loud, but firm, like talking to an animal. I should have put the car in reverse and left right then. The reason I didn't is embarrassing and honest. Curiosity hit at the same time as fear. The instruction was too specific. It wasn't about the food. It was about me. The camera at the gate was still pointed at my car. I could see the little dome above the keypad. I looked for a screen on the post and didn't see one. Then I noticed a small black box mounted lower, near knee height, angled upward. It had a faint glow like an LCD. I'd missed it because it was turned slightly inward, meant to be seen by someone standing at the gate, not someone sitting in a car. The figure was still approaching, almost to the point where they'd be in the dim spill of my headlights. They hadn't sped up. They hadn't slowed down. They were just closing the distance like it was inevitable. I leaned forward, cracked my window just enough that I could hear if they spoke, and craned my neck to look at the small screen on the gatepost. It showed my car from above. Not from a normal street camera angle. From higher up, like from a pole or a building corner. The view was sharp and wide, with the fence and the dead-end lane and my car centered like a target. It looked live. I could see my headlights. I could see the faint movement of my own head inside the car if I leaned the right way. I could even see the figure approaching from the top edge of the frame. But what froze me wasn't the angle. It was the timestamp in the corner of the screen. It read 3, and the date was tomorrow. I stared until my eyes hurt, thinking I was misreading it. I looked down at my phone clock. It was just after 2 a.m., same night, same date. I looked back at the gate screen. 3, tomorrow. The seconds were ticking, smooth and normal, like this was the correct time. I backed away from the window and sat upright so fast I hit my shoulder on the seatbelt mount. My brain did a quick, useless sprint through explanations. Wrong time zone setting. Wrong camera clock. Pre-recorded feed. Glitch. Hack. None of it mattered, because the only thing that mattered was what this meant in the moment. Someone wanted me to see that screen, and someone wanted me to feel what I was feeling right then. The figure stopped at the edge of my headlights, just far enough away that I couldn't see their face, but close enough that I could see their posture clearly. They didn't try the car door. They didn't wave. They just stood there facing my car like they were waiting for a step I hadn't taken yet. My phone buzzed again. Another instruction came in before I even touched the screen. You can leave it at the gate. Step out. I don't know if that instruction was pre-typed or if it was being sent while someone watched me. It doesn't matter. My body responded the same way it would if a stranger tried my door handle. I put the car in reverse and backed up hard enough that gravel popped under my tires. I didn't care about the food. I didn't care about the job. I didn't care about the rating. I cared about getting out of that dead-end lane with my doors locked. As I reversed, the figure didn't chase me. They didn't run. They just turned their head slightly, tracking the car, and I remember thinking that was worse. If it had been a random creep, they would have reacted. They would have shouted. This person acted like my leaving was one of the options they'd accounted for. I swung the car around as soon as I had room and drove back the way I came in, faster than I should have. The streetlights didn't start again until the main subdivision road, and when they did, I felt my shoulders drop a fraction, because at least now, I was visible to the world again. My phone stayed on no service for another minute, then suddenly popped back to life with 3 bars like nothing had happened. The app immediately updated. You are still at the customer. Then, like it wanted to punish me, it flashed a warning about completing the delivery. I hit help and the screen loaded halfway, then stalled. I tried to screenshot the order details. The screenshot saved. I know it did because I saw the little thumbnail. I tried to call support. The call button spun and did nothing. I tried to open my map history. It acted like the route had never existed. That's when I checked my rearview mirror and saw headlights behind me. Not close, not aggressive, just there. Turning the same turns as me, one intersection back, keeping the same spacing like they didn't want me to be sure. I told myself it was another driver, another resident, anyone. But the timing was too clean. The second I got signal back, the second I got the app back, there were headlights behind me. I didn't drive home. I didn't go to another pickup. I drove straight to the brightest place I could think of without planning it. In my case, it was a gas station off a main road, with people coming and going and cameras on the canopy. I pulled into a spot near the front door, under a light, and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing hard enough that my chest hurt. The headlights behind me didn't pull in. They slowed on the road, continued past the entrance, and disappeared into the grid like they'd never been there. I called 911 anyway. I didn't have a clean story. I told the dispatcher I was a delivery driver, that I'd been sent to a pinned location behind a neighborhood gate, that there were piles of old delivery bags behind the fence, that a person felt even more isolated now that I knew what I might be driving into. My phone buzzed again with another DoorDash notification, something about support reviewing the report, but I ignored it. I didn't care about the app anymore. I cared about getting out of this without making a mistake. We reached the street, and I recognized the house immediately because it was still dark, still blank, still wrong. I parked along the curb like the officer told me. He parked a few car lengths behind me, angled slightly. He got out. I stayed in my car with the doors locked, watching through the windshield as he walked up the driveway. His flashlight beam moved across the ground, the porch, the door. He knocked once, firm. No answer. He knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Then the porch light flickered on. It didn't stay steady. It buzzed faintly like the wiring was bad. The door opened a crack, and the man appeared again. From the street, I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the man's body language change when he recognized the officer. His shoulders lifted slightly like he was surprised. Then he did something that made my skin crawl even from a distance. He shifted his weight and started acting injured again, cradling his arm like it suddenly hurt. The officer spoke calmly, holding one hand out like he was asking for something. The man hesitated. Then he held out the paper. The officer took it, glanced at it, and said something else. The man's face tightened. He stepped back as if to close the door. The officer put his foot forward, not inside, but in the path of the door, and said something sharper. The man froze. The officer turned his head slightly and looked back toward my car, and for the first time since this started, I felt a little relief. Not because everything was fine, but because I wasn't the only one seeing it now. Someone else was looking at this and treating it like it mattered. The officer said something that made the man step aside, and then the officer entered the house. I hated that. Every instinct in me wanted him to stay outside, to call more units, to not go in. But he moved like someone who'd walked into a lot of houses in his career. He didn't look hesitant. He looked focused. The door stayed open behind him. I could see a sliver of the entryway from where I sat. Clean, empty. That bluish light deeper inside. The man hovered a step back like he was deciding whether to follow or shut the door. Then, he shut the door. The moment it closed, my heart started pounding again. I sat there, alone on a quiet street, staring at a dark house that now contained both the man and the officer. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers hurt. I told myself I could call 911 right now and tell them an officer went inside and I was waiting outside and something felt wrong. But I didn't know if that would help or just add confusion. I didn't know what the officer had called in already. I didn't know what the right move was. So I stayed. Seconds stretched, then a minute, then 2. I was staring so hard at the front door that I saw it move before I registered what was happening. The door didn't open. It jerked, like something hit it from the inside. Then it jerked again, harder. My stomach flipped. I heard a muffled